what has been the influence of the Celtic fringe on England and vice versa? We've spoken a lot about English individualism. We've spoken about in the previous episode how this is something that spread across the world with the Britain heading over to the Americas and Australasia and beyond. And now it's the water in which we swim, and that's modernity because of that English way of life, which was an emergent property many centuries ago, more than millennia ago. So instead of focusing all on England, what's been the influence of the Celtic nations on England and vice versa?
Well, just to declare an interest, my name is Alan Donald James Macfarlane, and I'm 5/8 by ancestry Scottish through my parents. I'm also about quite a lot Welsh. Two of my families are from Wales. Just two things that are surprising. One is that when I read history at Oxford, I had a Scottish, by name anyway, teacher, a very famous medievalist called James Campbell, and he sent me a long essay to do in the holiday, my first holidays, on Norman Scotland. And what that basically showed me was that during the Norman period, most of Scotland was just part of England. I mean, there were fringes, no doubt, the Outer Isles and right in the north, but most of it had been anglicised in its feudal, in its governmental structure, and in many other ways. So the clans were relatively weak. So the idea that until the unification of these countries, Scotland was a separate country, was shown to be a delusion. The Scottish kings who came to England weren't coming from a different country. They were coming from a country with very deep, similar roots to England. And the second part of that is that Scotland is two countries. The Highland Celtic Catholic Scotland of my ancestors, to a certain extent, and the Scotland, which is the wealthy part, the lowlands, is another Scotland. The lowlands are absolutely hardly different at all, and that's why the writings of people like Adam Smith from that area chime in so beautifully with English thought and so on. So you have to get the Highland line, which is in the middle of Scotland, and talk about these separately. My ancestors were on the west coast and now are still in the Outer Isles, but they thought in a different way. So the English very early, and they did the same in Wales. Wales from very early on was influenced by England and was united very early. So the English have had a huge and immense effect on the Celtic fringe. There's no doubt about that from very early on. In terms of the other way round, the whole Celtic world, the Gaelic language, the kinship system, everything about the Celts is very different from the Anglo-Saxons. And so that admixture of a much more poetic, spiritual, filled with myths and legends and a very different aesthetic and intellectual world has had, through Scottish writings and Scottish artists and others, and also Welsh and Irish, a huge effect on England. I mean, it's many of the greatest of our writers. My favourite poet of the 20th century, W.B. Yeats, for example, and others are from the Celtic fringe, and they carry across that deeper interest in a less practical world. The English are very plodding, down to earth, practical, money-seeking, nation of shopkeepers kind of people. These mystical kind of second sight, Scottish, away with the fairies sort of people are a very useful counterbalance. And, of course, their effect not only on England but on the British Empire is out of proportion to their size, because most, well, I don't know if it's most, but many of the early settlers, or rather colonialists, like my father and his family in India, were from Scotland. They went, this is for obvious reasons, which is Scotland is so poor. Once you get into the Highlands, there's nothing for anyone to do. It only needs one person to look after a herd of sheep. What are the other sons going to do? One might go into the ministry, but if you have one out looking after the sheep and one in the ministry, what are the rest going to do? They're going to go to India, Burma, China, wherever, and make the British Empire. So many of the great imperialists were Scottish, and many of those who set up the firms, like Jardine Matheson in Hong Kong and so on, Scottish. So it's had a huge kind of rebounding effect, because these Scotsmen, Irishmen, and in America, Welshmen, like my ancestors who went to Jamaica, they shaped the British Empire, and the British Empire shaped England.